All right, in this video, we are going to look at completing the texture part 1 blend modes. And these are going to deal with landscapes. So on our class course module, we've got all the details on here. Essentially, if you wanted to follow along in step-by-steps, we are looking very close at how to blend textures in Photoshop from the Photoshop Essentials website. They blend these two images essentially to create this image. However, we are going to make something a little bit more interesting than that. So let's get started here. You have 3 different assignment images that you could choose from: texture 1, texture 2, or texture 3, and then you have to use the landscape that's been provided. So I can give you any idea here. This is texture 1, texture 2, and texture 3, and then we've got our wonderful landscape. Everything is down here in the task list. This is an example of where we're gonna go with the final image, aside from having our little watermarks here. But let's go ahead and get started. So we could do a couple of different things to get in our image. We could file open, or we can drag and drop. I'm a big drag and drop fan, so I'm going to take in my landscape first. Very important that you take in the landscape first. All right, our next step is to decide which texture we want to use. And you are more than welcome to try out each one of these textures and see what works best. I'm going to take texture 3 and drag and drop that in here. Okay, once this is dragged and dropped, before I start moving things around, like before I start hitting this check mark or anything, I'm going to stretch this out. Now, the big difference here between Photoshop and Photopea is that when stretching in Photopea, we have to hold the shift command and then stretch. If you are in Photoshop, that is not the case. In Photoshop, you just stretch and then place this kind of where you think it'll look good. And we can either hit enter on our keyboard, or we can hit the check mark to confirm our setting. Okay, the next thing we're going to do, and this will be a little bit out of order compared to the information online, I'm going to go ahead and on my texture 3, my layer right here, I'm going to right click with my mouse and hit rasterize. If you're on Photoshop, it's the same thing. Just right click over in the dead space on that layer, and you may have to scroll down a little bit, but we're looking for rasterize or rasterize layer. All right, and it'll make that little icon there disappear, which is good. We need to do that for something that we're going to manipulate later in this video. Next thing we're going to do is take the blend modes. So blend modes are located right here, and we're going to pick and choose one that looks good. In Photoshop, with the new update, you literally can just kind of scroll over them, and it'll show you the difference. Not the case in our Photopea, but that's not a problem. You can just kind of sift through those, see what looks great or whatever. I would suggest to use either overlay, soft light, lighten, or screen. Any of those would probably be your best bet. Personally, I'm going to use overlay. I think that looks really, really nice. I'm a big fan of overlay, lighten, and screen, even sometimes soft light, but that's just from me going into a more Photoshop kind of example or idea. Whoops, hit D on my keyboard and it went to difference. Didn't want that. All right, now that we've got our wonderful appearance here going on, we are going to go up to image. We're going to go to adjustments, and we're looking for the word desaturate. On Photoshop, I think it's a little bit more up, but desaturate there, and that is going to turn this layer black and white. Once we've converted it to black and white, we can invert this. So Command I on a Mac or Control I on a Windows-based computer, and you're going to see some differences here. So whichever one looks better to you, whether it's this or whether it's that, there's not a right or wrong image. I actually like both of them a lot. I really enjoyed this look, but I also really like how bright this appears over here. I'm going to go with this one, though, just to do something a little bit different. Once you have created that, you could also go in and bring down your opacity a little bit just to get a little bit smoother appearance. And that looks pretty nice. So this is the basics to applying a texture on top of an image in Photoshop.